My Bloody Valentine is, in my opinion, one of the best slasher movies ever made. It's got all of the ingredients that give the genre its charm, with a very fun cast of characters, a cool villain backstory, and of course, great kills. Its ending leaves a fair bit to be desired, but overall, it's one of the strongest slashers out there, but it never wound up getting any sort of sequels. It wasn't until 2009 that there would be another movie from the IP, and since remakes were absolutely booming at the time, My Bloody Valentine got that exact treatment. Starring Jensen Ackles of Supernatural fame, the movie was written by Zane Smith and Jason X writer Todd Farmer and directed by Patrick Lussier, and is still to this day the only My Bloody Valentine movie to be made after that beloved original. Good evening. My name's Evan and welcome to Rocklin Graves. Last year, I covered the 1981 slasher classic My Bloody Valentine, which is an annual watch for me and one of my most cherished slasher movies. It's just so much damn fun, and being Nova Scotian myself, a lot of it feels right at home for me. I love that original, and I'd go as far as to say it's essential viewing for anyone interested in the slasher genre. As many great horror movies did, My Bloody Valentine was added to the incredibly thorough list of remakes released in the 2000s after the success of the solid Texas Chainsaw Massacre remake in 2003. And you know what? I'm not actually opposed to the idea of remaking My Bloody Valentine, because, as I've said before, I think one of the situations where a remake makes sense is when a movie has a great concept that wasn't fully realized. And while the original is great overall, the ending is pretty rough, and especially if they want to set up potential sequels, because that's just the thing to do, a remake that remains faithful to what the original did while fixing the issues with its ending isn't the worst idea. Did the 3D remake from 2009 revive what worked so well about the original and clean things up? There's only one way to find out.
Fuck you, Frank! Oh! Oh, jeez! What?
Well, it's not usually a good sign when a movie starts off with a huge expository info dump about something that really should be a drip-fed backstory to let tensions build up around it, but hey, at least, whoa! I'm not a huge fan of 3D movies. I have heard that the technology has improved immensely since Spy Kids 3D, but I've never really given it another shot since then, and My Bloody Valentine's got plenty of examples I could use for why I don't generally enjoy 3D movies. It just feels really gimmicky and cheap most of the time, and I got that feeling right away with these news clippings jumping off the page like the edible was a little stronger than I'd anticipated. Like, this looks like the opening to a true crime YouTube video essay, not a horror movie. Harry Warden's backstory is all revealed right away here, and instead of getting revenge on the negligent supervisors like you did in the original, here, he slaughters the entire floor of a hospital off-screen, like starving him in the mine gave him superpowers. Watching movies like this really makes me appreciate some of the recent slasher villains like John Carver and Art the Clown, who don't feel like they were designed to be Jason Voorhees ripoffs with a different name. There's no reason to make Harry Warden do shit like this, and his murder spree of random teenagers named after killers the writers of this movie really wanted Harry to be just adds on to that feeling.
Well, you think I was Harry Warden or something? Hey, Michael, check this out!
Oh, speaking of the writers of this movie, Todd Farmer wrote himself an extended sex scene and forced us to look at his bare ass. We'll circle back to that. Yeah, so the setup in the remake doesn't feel as compelling as in the original. Yes, Harry does go to the mine and try to get revenge on Tom Hanniger for not following the proper safety measures, but the whole plotline with Harry feels like an afterthought tacked on to the movie, and it very quickly feels like the writers wanted to be making a different movie. To brush over the killer's backstory with a cheap news clipping sequence right at the beginning of the movie doesn't allow us any chance to properly feel that story play out and get invested in it. Yes, it was still delivered through expository dialogue in the original, but that was in the context of a town legend told by a foreboding local who gave it some weight, and we also had the visuals to go along with it, and that let us get a better idea of what was going on. They also fumble this whole thing because the way Harry's portrayed in the remake here is much less a man driven insane by the horrific situation of the mine collapsing and more like he was already an asshole that just killed everyone else as a form of self-preservation. Harry Warden in the original was driven mad by what happened, but you kind of get the feeling that the Harry Warden in this movie had this in him the whole time. Not that he was sympathetic before, but I found this to be a far less interesting version of the backstory. Notice how I'm front-loading this review by focusing really heavily on Harry Warden? That is intentional, because the movie does the exact same thing, but not for any good reasons. It's because Harry Warden doesn't matter in the remake at all, and it's instead much more interested on jumping right to the whodunit stuff between Tom and Axel, so almost everything to do with Harry is shoved to the start of the movie and is very easy to forget about after that. Sure, his name comes up more, but since we don't have the plotline of the police trying to track down his records from the insane asylum, and the suspicions between Tom and Axel begin much earlier on, it winds up being pretty pointless. So this movie's mystery isn't so much whether or not Harry Warden is still alive, it focuses a lot more on trying to make you believe that it's Tom or Axel. Wanted to get that out of the way at the start because that's how it felt watching the movie, and now we can get to the bulk of this remake. The overall story is very similar to the original with a few key changes narratively and quite a different approach to the tone and characters. After Harry Warden's attack at the mine, Tom left town and is now returning after 10 years, which makes me wonder how old he was supposed to be in that scene, but hey. The love triangle sort of returns between Sarah, Tom, and Axel, but I think it's one of the better examples of where this remake really doesn't understand the things that made the original compelling. By the way, TJ's name is changed to Tom here. I don't know why everyone else's name is the same. One of the things that made that movie so much fun was the great cast of distinct characters who were entertaining and goofy, but also felt like friends who've actually known each other for a really long time and had their complications. Something that I've always loved about how the situation between the main three characters was handled is the scene between TJ and Axel in the junkyard, which is a very important moment. You can feel that they were good friends at a time, and that's still present here, but they're being divided by TJ's decision to pursue Sarah. Without this one scene, we really wouldn't have ever felt that there was and still is somewhat of a friendship between these two, which gives the tensions between them and Sarah a more genuine touch and also made the whole thing feel sadder. And little things like this moment where Axel's trying to apologize to Sarah for leaving, these kinds of things added a lot to that story. In the remake, no one ever gets along. They're always fighting and going at each other, which makes it nearly impossible to actually care about their relations to one another. Axel's getting jealous of Tom returning because he and Sarah used to be together, which might be a little more compelling if Axel wasn't shown cheating on Sarah in his second scene, so him getting pissy with her over Tom's return just makes him a wildly unlikable character who I have no sympathy for and don't care whether or not his marriage works out.
I'm pregnant.
Tom's got a bit more of an interesting arc since the reason for his return is that he's planning on selling the mine that he inherited from his father. The mine's sort of a beating heart for the town, and the locals are very unhappy with his decision, and I thought that the dynamic of him feeling like he needs to rid himself of it because of what happened, while also having this immense pressure from the town, was a good addition to the story that felt pretty anemic otherwise.
That mine is Harmony's lifeblood, Tom.
But Evan, why focus so much on story and characters? It's a slasher movie. Well, first off, bad point. Slasher movies don't need to have particularly complex characters or narrative, but they should have a cast that you want to spend some time with at the very least, and if the story isn't strong, then the movie has to really win you over with its killer and its kills, which I don't think this movie succeeds with at all, but I'll get to that in a sec. Point is, while these aren't elements that need to be super refined for the genre, they do matter. I found myself completely disengaged with the characters here because they just spend the whole movie fighting, and the story with the mine winds up being a bit of a throwaway that seems to only exist to give Tom a reason to return after his 10-year leave. He ultimately decides to keep the mine partway through the movie, and once he does that, the plotline can be entirely disregarded. There isn't much of a compelling mystery setup since the movie relies way too heavily on annoyingly obvious red herrings, and it's because I don't think the kills and the killer in the movie did enough to make up for the lack of engagement otherwise that I'm digging into these elements so much. Now, allow me to switch up the tone a little bit and say that there is some fun to be had with this movie as a schlocky slasher, which, make no mistake, despite how seriously it seems to take itself at times, that's what this movie is. It's a schlocky 3D slasher movie. For one, Tom Atkins is in it, so that automatically bumps up the score by a few points. What I found to be really weird about his inclusion though is that they never show him fucking anyone. Like, not once. Tom Atkins is never shown in coitus, which is a baffling creative decision if you ask me. Generally speaking, you want 73 to 94% of Tom Atkins' screen time to be spent on him hooking up with women with whom he has a questionable age gap, but I suppose his mustache is still a shining beacon of all that's good in humanity, so there's still that. There is a sex scene in this movie, but instead of Tom Atkins, we get Todd Farmer, which just really isn't the same. A lot of this movie feels like it's taking itself way too seriously, as I was saying, especially considering how the original did basically the polar opposite, but this is the one scene where it felt like they really knew what kind of movie they were making. It's a very dumb kill scene with some of the most gratuitous nudity I've ever seen, but hey, that's part of the charm of slashers at the end of the day.
I am no hooker.
You are now.
Well, Todd Farmer, you pissed her off enough with that one to run outside in the middle of the night absolutely buck-ass naked, and props to Betsy Rue for going full birthday suit for the whole scene. This isn't what I picture when I hear the name Irene. My Nana's name was Irene. How long was he in that truck for? Why was he in it in the first... Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's a stupid and entertaining sequence, and logic isn't exactly the core pillar of the genre anyway. I think all of my issues with this movie would be a lot less of a problem if the kills were more than tacky 3D showcases that don't really show a ton of creativity and just lack character. The 3D blood and gore looks atrocious and makes the movie feel absurdly cheap and corny, but at least for me, not in a charming way. It feels like a made-for-TV slasher during these scenes, and it's especially frustrating when you think about how cool the kills in the original movie were and how great some of those practical effects were. There are one or two moments where I felt like the movie handled this stuff well, notably when Tom Atkins gets a death that harkens back to what's probably the most memorable in the original. He's alive a lot longer, and it feels brutal as shit to see him struggling with this pickaxe in his face, but once the kill happens, the horrendous CGI kind of ruins the whole thing. The killer in this movie is just really uninteresting, and while the issues with plot and character can be forgiven in a slasher movie, when the killer is bland, the kills are equally so. That's when you really start to ask yourself why the hell you're even bothering to watch the movie in the first place. Only reason I finished it was because I was making this video. I probably would have turned it off halfway through otherwise. Not because it's all worthless garbage or anything like that, but because it's just bland.
Don't you remember how much that mine used to mean to your family? I guess not.
Well, I suppose it's time to talk about the killer's identity in the remake, which, if you ask me, is painfully obvious from the start of the movie, but if you're interested in this one and want to find that out for yourself, now's your warning. In the original movie, the killer reveal is the weakest part, and it's that ending that I think holds the movie back from being more widely known than it is. If you're gonna improve something about My Bloody Valentine, the ending and killer reveal would be the place to do it. Give the killer miner some stronger legs to stand on and close the movie off with more of an impact. In my opinion, that would be the only real reason to remake this movie, and it's the ending of My Bloody Valentine 3D that really seals the deal on me probably never bothering to watch it again. In the original, it turned out that Axel was the killer and was driven mad when he saw his father murdered by Harry Warden as a kid. It was a really weak reveal to say the least, so how does the remake change things up? Just swap it. Now it's Tom who's the killer, which is probably the most obvious move for the remake to go with. Apparently, he's been locked up in an asylum and was driven mad after watching Harry slaughter everyone at that party at the start, and he's developed some sort of split personality disorder where he's actually completely unaware that he's been the one committing the murders.
Sarah, shoot him! He's right there!
Nobody else here!
He's right there! Shoot him! Sarah, you gotta shoot him! Shoot him now! Shoot him!
Granted, to give the movie some credit, there are some genuinely cool hints about this throughout the movie. The one that I found to be the most compelling and actually quite creative is this scene when Tom's supposedly locked inside of the cage and Harry's going at the dude on the ground, and Harry's axe swings line up with Tom smashing against the cage. I thought that was really cool, but if you pick up on it, it kind of just gives away the ending of the movie. I think it's subtle enough that not everyone's gonna pick up on that though, so it's fine. It's cool, and I wanted to see more of that sort of creativity. What made this more frustrating is that Tom is the obvious suspect for the killer at the start. They do try and veer suspicion away from him and more onto Axel, but the fact that the twist is that the killer is the one you think it is 10 minutes into the movie is really frustrating. Oh, you thought it was Tom? Well, I have one for you. It was actually Tom the whole time! Maybe if this was done with a more competent script, it would have worked more, but it felt so deflating in this one. The whole third act was just really frustrating and cheap, and I think that one of the best examples of that is this sequence where Tom's smashing the lights in the tunnels. In the original, Axel did this to make it harder for the others in the mine to navigate, but since this happens during a chase sequence when Axel and Sarah are ahead of him, You can tell they literally just did this to use the effect of him flashing between Harry and Tom as a creative move. It seems like they were literally going for Tom's other personality being Harry Warden, which seems odd. It's all just very forced and didn't feel impactful or surprising at all, and God, how glad I am that they never made another movie with Tom Hanniger as the killer, like it seemed like they wanted to do with how they were setting up this last shot. Yeah, I didn't enjoy this movie. It's the kind of thing where it ended and I couldn't really come up with any reason to recommend watching it. The original is a far more entertaining movie with better characters and kills, the drama is nothing special, and the ending is another messy and unsatisfying closer. I suppose if you want to see some 3D kills, this is an option. That's about the only reason I can think to recommend it, but just watch Friday the 13th Part 3 instead. There's no distinct tone. Tom Hanniger is this weird split Harry Warden personality, has no character whatsoever and nothing unique to offer, and it doesn't feel like a remake made by people passionate about the original. I mean, for God's sake, we didn't even get an updated version of the Ballad of Harry Warden, which I think goes to show just how uninspired and bland this movie is at the end of the day. Not nearly as rosy a Valentine's video as I made last year when I covered the original, but can't win them all, I suppose. Don't watch that video though, it's probably shit. I truly do not remember. Alright, and what was next? What? Exorcist Believer. Right. Well, let's try and make the best of this. After Believer, we're back into the Omen franchise, so I'm looking forward to that. Until then, thank you for stopping by Rocklin Graves. I hope you've enjoyed your stay.